Greetings, folks, and welcome back to Shepherd's Voice Magazine. Happy to be with you for a second week in a row. Last week we were diving into the first 4 verses of Matthew 8, and today we're going to continue on in Matthew 8. As I had kind of said that this might turn into a 2-part message, and as I'm going through this, I see that it is going to be at least 3, but that's all right. We're going to kind of make our way through Matthew 8 because I do find it to be a really interesting and compelling chapter in the Bible as it pertains to interacting with Jesus Christ. And we get a really good snapshot in Matthew 8 as to what it was like to interact with Jesus Christ, the human Jesus who came and walked on this earth and performed such many mighty miracles and things to expose the Father. That is just amazing, and oftentimes I think we have a hard time, perhaps, really diving into a relationship with Jesus Christ, because of course we don't see him physically. He's not physically here with us, and it's difficult. I agree. It can be difficult to try to put ourselves in the position of being inside of this two-way relationship with Jesus Christ, and we kind of see what's going on around us and may not always be aware of the presence of Jesus Christ. And in Matthew 8, we see what it was like to actually be in his presence, and this is the faith that this is where we can draw our faith from, is seeing how Jesus interacted with people, and that really brings to bear some interesting things, because interacting with Jesus Christ and his interaction with other people and the places they came from and the station in life they had and whatever it was that they were coming to him with in terms of a request for healing, as it were, in a lot of cases in Matthew 8. This was a meaningful and a direct manifestation of what Jesus Christ had in mind to bring the Father to the people. And it is for us. You know, as Jim has said before, not everything was written to us, but the scriptures are written for us, and these are lessons in what it was like to have that relationship with Jesus Christ physically, and from there we derive our ability to have a spiritual relationship with him. So I'm not going to go through in any review of the first 4 verses that we looked at last time, because it's the blessing of YouTube. You can go back and watch that for yourself. It's a short video. It's the part 1 of Matthew 8, interacting with Jesus. And this, of course, part 2, we're going to jump into verses 5 through 17. I promised myself I was going to get you through more than 4 verses this time around. So that's what we're going to do today. And I'm going to start out by just reading the entirety of Matthew 8, verses 5 through 17. And I'm going to read those from the Christian Standard Bible, and then we'll start to pull apart little bits of the passage and see if we can't arrive at some sort of a lesson for ourselves today. So in verse 5 of Matthew 8, if you wanted to turn there, it says, "When he entered Capernaum, a centurion came to him, pleading with him." So this is a Roman centurion. Verse 6 says, "Lord, my servant is lying at home paralyzed in terrible agony." And in verse 7, Jesus said to him, and in the Christian Standard Bible, it's written as a question. It says, am I to come and heal him? And I know in the King James and other versions, it just says, I will come and heal him. So when we see it written as a question, it's kind of like if you were making plans with somebody and said, oh, so might I come and get you? Come and get you and we'll go to the Dairy Queen. Well, of course, it wasn't that trivial of a thing, but that's how it was written. That's the kind of question it is Jesus is agreeing with him. I'm going to heal this guy. And he said, am I to come and heal him? And in verse 8, Lord, the centurion replied, I am not worthy to have you come under my roof, but just say the word and my servant will be healed. And in verse 9, he says, for I too am a man under authority, having soldiers under my command. I say to this one, go, and he goes, and to another, come, and he comes, and to my servant, do this, and he does it. So, of course, we've read this numerous times. This is a fellow that was aware of, a chain of command. And in verse 10, hearing this, Jesus was amazed. And we'll circle back to that here momentarily. Jesus was amazed and said to those following him, truly I tell you that I have not found anyone in Israel with so great a faith. I tell you that many will come from the east and west and share the banquet with Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob in the kingdom of heaven. But the sons of the kingdom, and this is referring to Jews, scripturally speaking, when we see sons of the kingdom in this kind of context, he's referring to Israel, will be thrown into outer darkness where there will be weeping and gnashing of teeth. And we will circle back to all of these here in a moment, and we'll go through these and hopefully do some explaining. In verse 13 it says, then Jesus told the centurion, go, as you have believed, let it be done for you. And his servant was healed that very moment. And carrying on, it says, Jesus went into Peter's house and saw his mother-in-law, that is Peter's mother-in-law, lying in a bed with a fever. So he touched her hand, and the fever left. And then she got up and began to serve him. And then in the last two verses, 16 and 17, it says, when evening came, they brought to him many who were demon-possessed. He drove out the spirits with a word and healed all who were sick, so that what was spoken through the prophet Isaiah might be fulfilled. And then Isaiah 53 is quoted, he himself took our weaknesses and carried our diseases. So I'll just set that aside for now, as we might reference the CSB as we go along. So let's circle back to kind of what's going on here, because we have a little bit bigger of a body of scripture than we typically have. And again, there is a ton going on here. So we see here when Jesus had entered Capernaum and the centurion came to him, we can note that the centurion was a Gentile, obviously. He was a member of the Roman army. And most everyone in the community at the time, the Jews, that which would call itself Israel, there was really no political entity that was Israel at the time, just that which was under the thumb of Rome. But they saw the Roman occupation as a negative, obviously, and pretty much had all reason to hate this centurion. Yet this centurion comes to a Jewish teacher. This is so we're seeing a bit of a departure in what would typically be the character of a Roman centurion, and especially and significantly, I think, and not a lot of it has to do with he didn't come for any selfish reason. He came on behalf of someone else, and in this case, it was his servant or his slave. And this was an unusual attitude for a slave owner or a servant owner at the time to have, because under Roman law, a slave owner could kill his slave, and if that person was unable to work at the task that they had been given, if they were sick or injured and that sort of thing, it was almost an expected thing that the poor person's life would be exterminated for such a thing, So it was really a compelling thing, I think, to Jesus and to those around him, that this servant, or this centurion rather, came with a request for this servant of his, and it's recorded here as pleading with Jesus. So this was no casual request that he was making. He really had an emotional investment in this person that was his servant. And Spurgeon, I know every now and again I'll quote Spurgeon. I know not everybody likes him, but Spurgeon put it this way. He said, he seeks a cure, but does not prescribe to the Lord how or where he shall work it. In fact, he does not put his request into words, but pleads the case and lets the sorrow speak. So as you see, he doesn't ask Jesus right away, oh, please heal my servant. He says, my servant is at home, and he's, in some translation, paralyzed. And he's suffering. He's very, very sick. So this leads you to believe that there's a certain understanding of Jesus' authority that this centurion has. Because Jesus says, I will come and heal him. But then the centurion says, Lord, I'm not worthy that you should come under my roof. But just speak the word. Just say the words. And my servant will be healed, for I also am a man under authority, having soldiers under me. And we've read that time and again. We just read it. See, Jesus said, yeah, I'll come and heal him. And he did so without hesitation. Okay? He didn't hesitate to say that he would go to the centurion's house. And again, this is something that was much like when he said he was willing to heal the leper, and he reaches out and he touched the leper in the first 4 verses. You know, Jesus didn't find it against God's law or anything to be willing to go to this person's house. Under Jewish law at the time, it was completely forbidden. They couldn't go in. You know, they didn't see the house of a Gentile as being worthy for them. It was a pretty negative attitude they had. So we see that yeah, it was against Jewish custom, but it certainly wasn't against Jesus Christ, and it certainly wasn't against God. But you see, when the centurion met Jesus, he sees this Jewish teacher. I think it was pretty natural for him to assume that perhaps Jesus wouldn't want to come into his house or to travel. And he just, to go heal this servant. He didn't know. He had no way of knowing that things like this probably wouldn't bother Jesus at all. He had no idea of knowing. But he thought perhaps that Jesus might think he was, his house was unworthy. So he comes at him with that in mind. And he says, no, I'm not worthy that you should even come into my house. And he showed a great sensitivity to Jesus in this instance. Seeing as we're talking about interacting with Christ and all. You see, he wanted to spare Jesus this kind of challenge that would probably come at him. They like to murmur about him a lot, especially those in the community of Israel that was there, the Jews at the time. They like to murmur, the Pharisees and that. They like to murmur, the priests. They could probably make it pretty awkward. So he had this in mind. And I think that it is well described if we look at this as having a sensitivity to Jesus. And again, I'll try to remind us, of how Jim and I have come out here so many times. And I know Jim has come out so many times and said that we need to consider God's place and Jesus Christ's place in any discourse that we have. Okay, we have to consider them first. We have to consider God first. This is a great example of that coming from this guy. It's impressive. because he doesn't just have concern for his servant. And I think Jesus picked up on that. But he definitely had concern for Jesus. And that's interesting. So he says, but only speak a word and my servant will be healed. So he obviously understood that there was an authority there in Jesus, and that Jesus had the power to heal, and that this wasn't some sort of a magic trick. Okay, I've often said this, and I know I get repetitious about this stuff, but Jesus Christ, it's not a parlor act. The healing power and authority of God is not a parlor act. And I guess we'll never know in this life, in this time round, what compelled this centurion to understand and believe that Jesus didn't need to be there. Just say the word. And I think that's pretty interesting. He knew that this wasn't something of superstition. Rather, he knew that Jesus had authority and could command things to be done and completed outside of his immediate presence. And this included things like sickness and disease and possession, the serious things. And he noted that Jesus had power over that. So that says to me that this fella had a tremendous faith in the word of Jesus Christ. And we talked a little bit about that last time, about how Jesus Christ put his words into action, and the words themselves became power. And he goes on and he talks about how he's a man in authority and telling a servant to come and go and another soldier to come and go, and they do it. As I said, he understood this chain of command. All right? And how things could be obeyed unquestioningly. And this fellow obviously had in a mind for things that were kind of ethereal to the thinking of the average person at that time in the first century. That he understood that Christ had that kind of authority over those sorts of things. This is huge. This is really huge, and we have to, I think, take stock of the enormity of how these things took place and what took place and what must have gone through the minds of some of these folks. And then Christ praised him for his faith, and not only praised him but healed the fellow. It says he was healed in that instant. But we read in the beginning of verse 10, it says, when Jesus heard it, he marveled. He marveled. And again, this is something I don't want us to just read right on past. He actually marveled. This wasn't just a ho ho ho, no. I think he was shocked. And I think this goes along again with what Jim said a couple of weeks ago when he mentioned that there are questions and things that we could bring as a petition before God that can challenge him. But if that challenge is done in faith with the intent of learning and doing more for God, well, then I think that challenge is not only accepted, I think it's welcomed. I think it's invited. This is the kind of thing that proves it. Here is this Gentile person, this centurion, somebody invested in the army of an occupying force in the land. It's supposed to be full of the people that are children of the kingdom, sons of the kingdom, as it says. Yet they were some of the most wicked people on the earth at the time. Right? And here this guy comes out of all of that. And not only seeks the healing power of Jesus Christ, but doesn't even think that Christ needs to go there. This is amazing thinking. This is advanced spiritual thinking. And Christ noted it, and he marveled at it. And I think that shows this human side that Christ had, and that he's aware of even now, and that's how he can relate to us. And he marveled. You know, Jesus Christ experienced some very human things, and we've gone over, of when we have a high priest who wept. And consider the extreme loneliness that he went through right up until the point in time that his physical life ended. When he cried out to his Father, "Why have you forsaken me?" and no answer came back. Someone who, before that transpired, scolded his friends, those who called themselves friends of his, because they couldn't stay awake with him a little while longer as he was waiting to suffer. A person that has experienced those things and understands those things, it shouldn't be any surprise to us, or it shouldn't be something unbelievable to us, at the very least, when we see in Scripture that he marveled. He marveled and said to those who followed, "Assuredly, I say to you, I have not found such great faith, not even in Israel." This land, like I said, that was supposed to be full of those who were just so close to God because of, in their mind, because of their relationship to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. And Christ says, I say to you that many will come from east and west and sit down with Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob in the kingdom. But the sons of the kingdom, that is, as we said, Jews and Israel, will be cast out into outer darkness, and there will be weeping and gnashing of teeth. And then Jesus said to the centurion, "Go your way. As you have believed, so let it be done for you." And his servant was healed that same hour. This confidence in the ability of Jesus' word alone to heal showed that this fellow was free of superstition and reliance on things external. He was a living symbol of oppression, and yet he showed the greatest faith that Christ had seen, as he said. And, many will come from the east and the west to sit down with Abraham. The fact that this kind of faith was actually, inside of a Gentile is what caused Jesus to announce that there would be Gentiles in the kingdom. And then went further and said that they'll actually sit down and eat with Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. You see, this was a seriously out there kind of idea in Jesus' day. This was not anything short of radical thinking to many in Jesus' day, because they really did believe that there would only be Jews at that messianic banquet, as it were, and that there would be no Gentiles at it. But the sons of the kingdom will be cast into outer darkness. See, what Jesus is talking about here is that, he's kind of admonishing his Jewish listeners that just as the Gentiles race wasn't going to be a stumbling block or something that would preclude them from the kingdom, well, ipso facto, in the same way, being Jewish and of the line of Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, all that stuff was not going to be a guarantee. Christ was really throwing down a warning here. Because as I said, the Jews were referred to sons of the kingdom in Scripture, in this passage in particular. Okay, so there's further things I can say on some of that, and we can discuss more about this particular terminology, but that is definitely something that we're going to tackle in more depth on another day. So if you'll excuse me one moment, it is, again, very dry here in Alberta. I'm going to take a quick drink here. Let's move on to consider some things here in Matthew 8 in verse 14. The next two little parts here to dealing with Jesus Christ coming and healing. There's not a ton written about it, but I like those kind of scriptures because there's always a lot going on there, right? So in verse 14 it says that now when Jesus had come to Peter's house, so he's traveling with his disciples. He's got Peter, and it says that he came to Peter's house and he saw Peter's wife's mother, so his mother-in-law, lying sick with a fever. So he touched her hand and the fever left, and she arose and served him. And I believe it's pretty much the same translation in the CSB. Yeah, it's exactly the same. He saw she's sick. She's laying there. She's got this fever. She's feeling terrible. And he gently touches her hand. And suddenly the fever is gone. So it would appear that this illness that she had was likely, and I would say we can pretty much bank on it, a lot less severe than what we read in the first 4 verses of Matthew 8, when the fellow with the skin disease and ailment, so forth, it came to him. But this is significant too. First of all, I want to just drop in a little fun fact. We're not going to dwell on it here, but this kind of proves that Peter was married. Don't want to pick on our poor friends over in the Catholic Church, but they teach that all their priests have to be, celibate and unmarried. Now, of course, there was a period of time in the papal lineage that they did get married and that sort of thing, and a lot of it had to do with the states getting either turned over to the state or turned over to the Catholic Church. So, of course, there was all that went into it in history. But they do, and I have heard some of my Catholic friends, they attach the celibate life of a priest to Peter. And he was definitely married. So, just a fun fact. We'll just throw that out there. But he sees her laying there sick. He touches her hand, and the fever left. So, again, it's similar to what we read in the first 4 verses. There's still this reaching out and the touching of the person. But what I want us to kind of look at here is these two things. That not only was it less severe than what the leper had been going through, or whatever skin ailment it was that he was going through. And here's the significance. I think that this says that Jesus cares for small problems as well as calamity. And then when he walked in to that house, he identified the problem immediately. And even though it wasn't a world-ending problem, mercy and love are still at the core, right? So Jesus Christ reaches out and he touches her. And the second thing I want us to look at about that is that as soon as this happened, the fever left, she arose and she began to serve them. Peter's mother-in-law showed a pretty healthy response for someone who has been touched by Jesus Christ. She immediately began to serve. So again, this is one of those situations where we have to look in a mirror, maybe ourselves, and think back to the last time that perhaps we knew we had been touched by the very hand of Christ. What did we do right in the wake of that? Did we begin to serve immediately? I'm not trying to make any judgments on anything, because I apply this stuff to myself as well, but is that what we did? Just asking the question, putting it out there for us so that we can, even these painful things, because sometimes the answer to the questions like that, it is a little painful. But again, brethren, I would take some encouragement in that, because that's how we grow. But she began to serve. And I would say that serving Jesus is evidence of being restored in a spiritual way and having our spiritual health restored. So continuing in verses 16 and 17. And this is the section where, again, it's a little bit more vague, but it says, when evening had come, they had brought to him many who were demon-possessed, and he cast out the spirits with a word. And he healed all who were sick, that it might be fulfilled, which was spoken by Isaiah the prophet, saying, he himself took our infirmities and bore our sicknesses. This is quoting Isaiah 53. They brought to him many, that it might be fulfilled. Partially because Isaiah 53, I say partially fulfilled, because not that it fell short in any respect. It's our own consideration of this. Isaiah 53 is primarily speaking of a spiritual healing. However, physical healing is included. Okay, so that's why I say it's partial fulfillment. I think Matthew understood this too as he was writing this. But this all shows Jesus as the true Messiah in delivering people from bondage in general. Bondage being sin and the effects thereof. And everything that's available in this world that can kind of pull us off the rails and distract our focus. He himself took our infirmities and bore our sicknesses. All that I'm really going to say about this today is that the physical component of healing can be partially realized now. Not always, but it can be partially realized now. But in finality and in the end, it will be completely realized through resurrection. Again, a cornerstone of our faith being the resurrection. So just as a bit of a review as we go through this and hopefully come to the end of this message at some point here today. You see, this section of Matthew that we've read through, both in part 1 and today, well, they show 4 different types of people, 4 very different individuals being healed. They're all different from each other in some respect, and how Jesus dealt with them was a little bit different in each one. Well, sometimes considerably different in some. But let's note that the first fella was a Jew with a disease. He was a Jewish fellow with a disease that gave him no social status, gave him no religious privileges. Okay, he had nothing in society. He had been stripped bare because of his affliction. We just read today, in some depth about the Gentile officer, this guy in the forces of an occupying army and government. And this fella came. And a woman related to one of Jesus' devoted followers. Peter, one of the preeminent writers in the New Testament. Not the preeminent first pope and all that kind of stuff. Nothing like that, but definitely an integral piece of Jesus Christ's ministry as he went forward in his physical ministry. And then after he was crucified, Peter kept on with, right up to the point of his death. His mother-in-law, was healed. So this is someone that was a bit more familiar to Christ. And then there's these multitudes that were brought to him. It says that he drove out the spirits with a word. And we see different ways that these requests were made. And the poor fellow with the skin disease came and threw himself at the mercy of Christ and said, "If you are willing, I know you can heal me." So he acted on the faith that he had. And we see that in these people that came to Jesus. They acted in the faith that they had, even after the healing. Peter's mother-in-law, the faith that she had, she was healed and thankful and set to serving straight away. So we see, direct requests and direct interaction, but compelling as anything has got to be the centurion. A request from one fella for another. It was made in faith on behalf of someone else who was suffering. And notice that Jesus didn't question the faith of the fellow that was suffering, the servant or slave, whatever you want to call him, that was suffering. In fact, in all of these instances, he didn't go after, the belief system that the people were brought up in. Notably, the Roman centurion, who would have probably been exposed to the pantheon of Roman gods and so forth, paganism. This was the influence that was on Israel that made them such a wicked people at the time, is that they were so involved with the superstitions, and there was kind of an addiction to magic and that kind of thing that was going on at this time. But yet the centurion had faith enough that when he came to Christ, Christ was more than willing to heal him, would have gone to his house. Had the fella not kind of marveled at Jesus and had him stop in his tracks a little bit, recognizing this kind of faith. And Jesus used different methods each time. He used a forbidden method when he was both willing to reach out and to be in physical contact with the fellow with skin disease. He didn't use anything more than words when he dealt with the servant of the centurion, who was in a different location altogether. When it came to Jesus caring about smaller problems too, and Peter's mother-in-law, simple, gentle touch. He used that approach as well. And then, when it says that they brought him multitudes, he cast out spirits with a word, and it says, and he healed the sick. We're not even told what the variety of methods are that he used, but I'm certain there was a variety of methods that even though they're not recorded specifically. But he used them to heal people, those that were brought to him, and then as he traveled, the folks that would get brought to him. So as we close things out for today, in terms of interacting with Jesus, let's note that these particular instances that we've been looking at today, hopefully they'll color our thinking, and we can use them as a backdrop to our thinking and how we consider how it is that we play our part in this relationship that we have with Jesus Christ. And if there's a takeaway from today, I want us to understand, hopefully in greater fashion, how physical healing is a particular area where God expresses his sovereignty. And how it is that Jesus Christ came both to announce and to exemplify this, so that we might go forth and do our best to do the same. So with that, I am out of pages, therefore I am out of time once again. Thank you for joining us here for part 2 of our little walk through Matthew 8. God willing, we'll be back for a part 3, and I think probably a part 4, but maybe just part 3. And God willing, you'll be able to join us then. So I want to say happy Sabbath to everybody. Please give us the thumbs up or the thumbs down, whichever one kind of turns your crank on whether or not this message did anything for you today. Go ahead and leave us some comments down at the bottom. If you will, hit the bell icon so you can get some notifications when these messages are going up. Thanks again for joining us. Happy Sabbath, and we'll see you next time on Shepherd's Voice Magazine.